So welcome everyone to the Augmented Society Network's July session. The title is Beyond Systems, Being and Belonging. And this month we are looking at the way in which everybody deals with inclusion, exclusion, both personally, professionally, and in the world of design, computer interfaces, and so on. Now, in last month's session, we were looking at the space we all inhabit. And in this month's session, we're looking more towards our own selves, how we actually respond to the world around us, to see how we actually see our place within it, and how we are the agents that improve and understand and bring a sense of belonging to everybody that we can. We are looking at also, because this is the Augmented Society, how we design for inclusion. And in the event description, you'll see that we mentioned the left-handed scissors and the fact that there are ways to properly design and include everybody. So the questions we're looking at this week really are being present and understanding privilege and what we bring when we connect with others. So when you actually go to something or you're encountering people, how do you present yourself and how do you ensure that everybody is included and that you're sensitive to others' needs? How we can define by default for inclusion, and how we develop empathy and appreciation and avoid exclusion. So any experience that you have to offer in that area, we would be grateful to have your input today. As I said, for those of you that have just joined, I will manage the chat, but again, please feel free to assist in any way. We are both introvert and extrovert at different times. Every second, I find myself incredibly confident, and then the confidence completely disappears and I become somebody else. So we all struggle with these ideas of being, of your sense of self and belonging. So I'm going to hand over to Jonathan, who is the co-host for today, and will open up the subject. And then let's go through in the normal way that we do, with everybody adding to that conversation. So welcome, and let's get started. Jonathan.
Thanks. And Maylin, I'm so excited that you've already got your hand up. Just one thing to sort of set the table here beyond what Zoe brought up. Looking back at the last month when we were talking about inclusion and how do we bring everybody to the table to make sure that there's representation, the conversation started getting into the individual and how do we start small? And there were some thoughts that like, oh, you can't, it can't be small, it's got to be big, blah, blah, blah. I'm firmly of the belief that it can start small, especially with the Augmented Society. We're always talking about systems, whether it is technology or just society. There's tremendous value. My hope is to learn a lot from everybody in conversation about what are the systems that we can look to help ourselves, not just have everybody at the table, to understand what they brought, right? It's not enough just to say, oh, don't be racist. It's also, well, why shouldn't you be? Or what did other people have to go through that you might not have, whether you're in a place of privilege or you're the actual outsider. It's not just about walking in somebody else's shoes, it's being in somebody else's mindset, which is really challenging, especially in today where, hell, with empathy, I would argue that much of society has forgotten what empathy even means, much less how to put it into practice. There are a few things that I've seen in terms of how we can begin to understand what people go through. And I would love to hear others. One thing that has been certainly front of mind in the past few days has been a fallout from the Euros final, where there were, obviously it went to extra time, and then after that it was still tied, so it went to penalty shots. England versus Italy. England had 3 young players that were selected to take penalty shots. I won't go into the details of how the game is working, but there were 3 out of the 5 players for England that missed the shot. And unfortunately, instead of us thinking how amazing it is that maybe there was a 19-year-old put in a situation that I couldn't fathom myself being in at 19, with all the pressure and with all the fans and the expectations and all of that type of stuff, it unfortunately became this disgusting discourse on race because of the actions that happen. And so everybody's been focusing on the race aspect, which is horrible in its own right. And but sometimes I wish that we would focus on how amazing it is for people to practice what they've practiced, to even be in the position. I only wish I had the talent to be in a position to miss a goal like that. And too many of us don't think in those terms. And so I'm hoping to be enlightened on what are some of the ways that we can help ourselves to appreciate that. Being open to things that you might not have had any opportunity to experience yourself.
Well, that's a difficult question because you haven't been in that situation. But if I like the example you just posed, because just to also to put more information, the 2 that made the penalty from England were white. The 3 that missed were black. So what is it that is so difficult for us to accept the difference? Instead of if I am prepared for the difference, because I think we are not prepared. I don't know, if I win the lottery, not the lottery, that I win a trip to the space right now, I'm not prepared to go to the space. With Branson or Bezos or whatever, I win a ticket, I won't be prepared. But how to accept change, diversity, and then I will be more inclusive. So I don't have the answer, but what comes to my mind hearing you, Jonathan and Zoe, is that should be teach from the school. It's like you need to teach that there are differences. It's amazing that I found a research that shows how many couples will accept that their kids will go to a date, not to marry, go to a date with a person with a different party that your parents in US. So parents won't accept, 50% of parents right now, if they are Democrats, they don't accept that their children go outside with a Republican. 50%, that's unbelievable. So that's your example, this example, and several others. So I think that, I don't know what, but we need to teach, accept difference since the beginning, since kindergarten.
And I struggle with the prominence of an all-male game. When will that have an equivalent? What do we watch that's female that would have such an impact on a whole country? I'm not sure I can think of a single thing. So we are discussing a very narrow field. My concerns are for those people, and it's a shame Amy's not here yet, but for the people that aren't here, that aren't present. And I know I talk about this a lot, but the privilege of being here and being able to talk against the not being here, not being part of the conversation. And also, how do we change that? And it's also something, it's great that we're all, or some of us certainly will be fellows of the Royal Society. Wow, that's a great place to be, but I see it as a mantle that needs then to push as many ways to include as possible. Yeah.
Just to go on like Carlos and Jonathan talking about what happened in the game, but if we're looking at differences and maybe even reconciliation, but it's very hard to start at differences. And so, there's certain things that people were saying, and I think the first step to any sort of like real kind of understanding or getting to belonging or inclusion is just first of all, understanding what the other person is saying. why is it that they are having this kind of justified or unjustified perspective. And I think just understanding what the perspective is and being heard and acknowledged, I think that would take the conversation or the possible dialogue significantly more, significantly wider. And in that sharing of what they, have in that they share with their perspectives, they'll realize that there's so much in common. That in fact, the so-called racist and the so-called inclusive people both really wanted England to win, and they're heartbroken about that. And their rage is coming out in slightly different ways. And one's blaming it on, racism, and the other one's blaming it on and just taking it out on the racists because they're just angry that England lost. And so it's very confusing a little bit, right? How the rage comes out. And so I think, these first couple of steps are really essential to this process. And so kind of understanding, and that comes out similarities, and then can come out a little bit of empathy, a little bit of understanding. And then all of a sudden, oh my God, we were all supporting England. Wow, that was really awesome.
Right.
I wish he had picked a more experienced player than a 19-year-old. I think that too.
Yeah, and I would like England to finish it in the allotted time instead of spreading it out and creating so much agony. I mean, come on.
Hi, everyone. This is my first RSA event, so if I transgress in any way, please slap me. Okay, I am Singaporean, but I have lived in California for over 35 years. I went back. I was invited to give a talk in Singapore, a very small talk, like 5 minutes. But in there, I was asked about the concept of Chinese privilege, because Singapore is majority Chinese. And the Malay community really has a lot of anger about this. And then after, and it became front page news because I said, this is a very bad use of a term which has a much different genesis in the US. And to actually use such a fraught term as white privilege and then translate it to Singapore is not helping the conversation. I accused everybody of intellectual scarcity. This became very, it really stirred things up. Then I was invited by a Malay podcaster to be on a call. And it really helped me to see how much anger there was. And I had to admit to Chinese advantage. I didn't want to use the term Chinese privilege because of the use and way it had been used in the United States didn't seem applicable. But it's true, a majority race has privilege. And so it really, really opened my eyes. And then I just one more story. So last Sunday, I was in a meeting about women privilege and male privilege, I guess, was the thing. And but it happened that I was the only woman of color in the whole meeting, meaning everybody else was of the white race, Caucasian. And at one stage they said, we are all Celts. It was all about the Celtic tradition of celebrating women. And I was like, I really feel excluded. And so I'm bringing this to the fore because without actually being on the other side, and you can be on the other side in many different ways, but by not being on the other side, you will never understand. Just my point, and I didn't understand until I was really put on the hot seat by this Malay podcast.
Thank you. That's a lot of what you say about being on the other side, that there's a lot of people that, you're absolutely right, haven't been on the other side. And so that's part of the challenge too, of how do you provide an opportunity for those who have never been the other or an outsider to have empathy for that. Simon, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, thank you. I've been on the other side. I lived in Singapore and Malaysia for 10 years. So I've kind of had a bit of an outside view into that. And to use the phrase, there certainly is in Singapore, there's Chinese supremacy, but in Malaysia, there is Malay supremacy because they are, as Malin said, they are the dominant race. And so they in Singapore's case, rather subtly skew things towards the Chinese. In Malaysia's case, rather blatantly skew things towards the Malay, to the extent where in Malaysia, if you're Malay, you can get a better interest rate on your mortgage or your savings account than you can if you're Chinese or of Indian descent. I've been on the other side in the sense I've experienced racism in Singapore. So, I've been excluded from things because of my skin color. Assumptions were made about how I would respond or react because of my skin color, and nowhere near to the extent that these three guys have experienced because of the football match. Not even close to what people experience on a day-to-day basis. But those few moments where I've experienced people being racist towards me made me feel so worthless and so shite, for want of a better word, that to experience that on a daily basis, to experience it to the extent and to the volume and to the frequency to which these guys and many others have suffered racism, is that point you turn around and go, if this is what it's like, if this is even what it's remotely like, then I want to do something about this. I want to make sure that my kids don't have to have that conversation about racism or about sexism or about any of the other things that we have a tendency to discriminate against. And my day-to-day work now is about working with people and trying to help people return to work after career breaks. And a lot of that is down to, we get a lot of sexist judgments, a lot of judgment against people with disability, but also talking about how do we make this an everyone issue. There's a lot of noise in the UK about trying to make flexible work and returning moms and things like this. But that's only half the population. So why not make it an everyone's issue and say, let's get flexible work for the dads, the people returning after recovering from life-threatening illnesses or life-changing injuries or redundancy or whatever it might be, but you make it an everyone issue and suddenly it becomes a topic which everyone's talking about, and it's suddenly things get done about it and those perceptions start to change much faster. And I've been scratching my head for years now trying to work out how do you make racism an everyone's issue without being racist towards everybody. So they all experience that, what I experienced very briefly, to start to understand what that experience is like, and therefore just commit to making changes.
No, I was just going to say something very quick, which was this idea about us being able to deal with racism is like the edge of the coal face. And before we kind of deal with the heat of such a big topic like racism, and kind of also roughing on what Carlos was saying earlier about we got to teach kids earlier, is that whatever the conflict is, it might not even be racism. It could be, what topping you want to put on your pizza with your sister. That could be a really quite an intense conversation. But in any conversation, we don't have the skills to reconcile. Like May was saying, when she had the experience of the other, she was able to empathize and shift her entire perspective on the situation. And if a kid can go, I understand why he doesn't want mushrooms because they make him sick on my side of my pizza, even that little understanding goes towards one's ability to change their mind and to empathize. And I think that especially with children's learning, but even adult learning we need to kind of enable people to have much lower stress, less stressful, but truly like genuine, authentic experiences of changing their mind, like Neil was talking about. Because otherwise, it's just a hypothetical thing. And we can practice with everything, and with our kids, we can practice with really simple things, Carlos, right? Like, little things can be an opportunity for true empathy, like a true opportunity for creating a learning moment for real empathy so that they can translate that into more and more in their lives.
Great points. That translatable element is huge. And the openness is, and maybe to what Carlos had put in the chat about humbleness being a part of our socialization, and the fact that, again, we don't know everything and needing to be open to things. And whether you're learning as a child or as an adult, there's just new information that's coming through. I mean, hell, the conversations I have with my 12-year-old daughter about pronouns, and she doesn't, I'm sorry, they don't want to be known as she. And that's all, like, if you look at the stigmatism that's been put with she. We talked about it earlier with the football, like in the US, the women's club that has won championships gets paid significantly less than the men's club, right? And so there's all these things that are just entrenched and about opening the eyes and seeing new stuff. And if we can even look at it, again, I'm concerned in society right now, everybody is of the I got mine mentality and not about how can we help each other get, there's an abundance of resource and how do we use that? That's, I want society to get there. But if it's the, I got mine, you don't look at the other things. In my family, we didn't have to choose between servicing our kids at home because of the pandemic or being able to be in an office. But now all, like you look at, I'm concerned, you look at all the gains that women, minorities, whatever have made in the workforce might have been, if we don't watch out, might have been completely reversed because of the pandemic, because there's no support systems in place for those children to be taken care of when the school is in lockdown. And I am not sure that we're not going to have another lockdown in quick succession based on this new variant or these new variants. Mm-hmm. If we all looked at that, and to what Simon was saying, providing for all, you know, if we looked at it as more of like, it's not just about for this group, how can we change it? I know that there are some politicians that are saying we need to find universal health, childcare, like all these types of things. Granted, if you're not able to be in school, you're not able to be in school, but you know, just those types of things. Let's get open to what people that we might not have ever come in contact with, what are they going through?
That's tricky if we're combining being humble with a society that generates me, I, mine, and combine that with what I see as the century of self and the surfing of acronyms and the inability to experience other. Linda, sorry, carry on.
No, that's okay. This is it's such a complicated, do you know what I'm saying? It's just like, oh, I think about this and I'm just like, oh my gosh. What I see in my experience in schools is that children are very accepting. Children are very accepting. They're much more open, and which is great, you know, but somewhere along the line, we just squelch that. We just
yeah, but Linda, their parents of those children are not accepting. Sorry to interrupt.
Well, no, their parents may not be, but the children themselves are. When they're at school and they're interacting, they're very accepting. And then our society just like sucks it out of them, along with a lot of other things that we do to kids, poor kids. I also wonder, here's my question, is that in this really rapid fire experience that we live in, the pace at which is just so quick, is that empathy takes time. Understanding takes time. And we don't live in that world. I mean, everything is rushed. Everything is a hurry. I just wonder if that doesn't have something to do with, that's where we jump now. We automatically, you know, like in the game, you know, you jump to what is right in our face, and you're different than me, instead of understanding, because that takes time. And we're all too just rushed. I don't know.
Linda, that point was, Zoe and I were talking about something very similar before, that we as society are so attuned to taglines. We are so accustomed to taglines that even if you try to go further than the surface, then you start people start referring to you as elitist because you dug deeper. Just stop talking about it. I see the tag, I see this, just do it, to quote Nike. You know, that's what the society has become, a society of taglines. And how do we break through that?
You know, Linda, what really struck me about what you said is it's true. We are like, everything is sped up so quickly. And if you look at that from a neurological perspective, if you want to be contemplative and to therefore learn something new, which requires a bit of time and empathy, that does require time for your brain to actually go through that process. And if you have to make decisions very quickly because everyone else is making the decisions, it's scrolling is happening so quickly, you know, our lack of attention because it's being ingrained in us, then your brain doesn't have time to actually go to the learning center. So it's just using its models to make these reactive decisions. And that model making process in our brain, that architecture in our brain, is really easily programmable by outside influences like Facebook and Instagram and so forth, because they're like habitual, and this thing is just kind of a habitual absorber, right? So the patterns it absorbs are habitual, whatever those habitual patterns are. It could be walking, it would absorb that pattern. It could be scrolling, it'll absorb that pattern. Shrink time, you just go to the default pattern instead of actually saying, what do I really want to do?
Listening to particularly the most recent about being rushed, actually, I kind of like the fact that I'm being rushed, because I'm trying things that I wouldn't normally do just because, you know, I don't have time to do it the right way. So I try something else, and which I wouldn't have done if I had lots of time. So, you know, it isn't always a bad thing.
But when I think of Rush too, I think of surface, like what you're saying, Jonathan. You know, we only, you know, we get CNN and we get the bites really quickly, but it's just going to the surface. The same thing happened with the athlete because she smoked marijuana, and it was like there was no thought to what occurred there. I mean, it was just jumped. All of a sudden, it was like, oh, you know, she's being discriminated against, and we only do this because of the color. You know, she was only you know, not able to participate because of the color of her skin. And I'm like, why are we even rushing to go there? Why do we want to even go there? There was an incident that happened. Do you know, I don't know. I don't know why we do that to ourselves. I don't get it.
I think both like towards what you're saying, Linda, with being rushed, but also what you mentioned about the kids, you know, they're open and can take in information. And I agree with what Simon was saying, that we should, you know, as parents, it's sort of our responsibility to kind of teach our kids these things early on. But that being said, I think we still need to kind of reprogram the parents, because if you're a parent today and you kind of just go through the motions, then that's also what you're going to give away to your kids. And I think one of the things that could open your eyes is, you know, talking to other people, but sometimes it might come through other channels that you don't necessarily expect. For instance, my friend, well, actually they had like a workshop at work talking about pronouns, and basically, you know, did like a whole questions, you know, have you ever given second thought to when are you go on vacation? And then they had to kind of like put a line down if they did it. And I think that kind of opened people's eyes for like, oh, there's actually all these things that I've actually never had to think about, but other people in the room had to because of their, you know, gender or race or whatever. And I think it's important that we sort of champion some people that can kind of speak to this and go out and do that in the world, because there are definitely some people out there that don't necessarily not want to learn, but they're just not at that phase or at that stage where they can kind of champion the project, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Interestingly, there was a gentleman who had RSVP'd to join this, and I wish he had. His name is Ed Kerwin, and he put together, it's called Impact Week. And what they do is they create, each year they do for Impact Week 5 different videos. And we look at content and how powerful content is these days. 5 different videos of different background people and their backgrounds. So then they take those and they do programming with schools around the world. So I think in 2021, it was February, like 3rd week of February, they had schools participating from 48 countries, which is great reach. I think that was only the 2nd year in existence. So that's fantastic. But in that, one example that I saw a video was a Afghanistan gentleman who his family had been put into a mess all the way back from the Soviet incursion and the wars that were going on there. And he brought it through in like a 15-minute piece, his experience in dealing with the Taliban and his explanation of why the Taliban was accepted, or what he went through to ultimately now he was able to move to the UK, and he fought for 1.5 years in detention in the UK to be able to live in UK. He's opened up a restaurant in West London. He's now finally brought his family over. It's like all of these things that we just don't have access to. And so many people, like, and hopefully through things like this, we get it. And it's a question of, again, our openness to learn about these people, to do the hard stuff, to question ourselves and our own understanding. Really fascinating. And I do hope, as we look at technology getting better and the access to more content becomes available, we are open to these types of things, or push ourselves to those uncomfortable positions.
Yeah, I'm interested in how we show up, how we arrive at different situations in our lives, how we ensure equity or inclusion. How do you do that personally? I will ask a question and the answer will be directed to the men in the team. So if I say, excuse me, I asked that question, could you speak to me, how do I actually direct that at the time? Now, I'm very calm and I have done that. And generally, it's okay. But I'm interested in your personal experience of promoting inclusion. Mei-Lin, you said, let's encourage the women here to speak. There are more women in this conversation than there are men. And so I would like to offer that opportunity. And I really am interested in how just in your daily lives, you encounter that experience where I try on a daily basis to make difference happen in an acceptable way that take people along with me, not label me, because as we all know, the labels are then very easily applied to that woman. You can speak to her. I'm not going to go and speak to her because she's difficult. When actually what I'm saying is please treat me as an equal. When sometimes that is actually coming from a place of insecurity and the norm may be more comfortable, but isn't going to take me through the day. So what practical ways do you, on a daily basis, take yourself through a day with equality of experience as a central element of the way you experience that day? Any help, tips, any ways in which you really felt you made a difference, you didn't upset anybody, and you felt good because you'd actually been able to do something positive?
Well, how about not minding if you upset somebody? I mean, lighten up a bit.
Yeah.
You have
Mei-Lin.
to break eggs to make the cake. You have to be prepared to do that.
Yeah.
You can't put a whole egg into the mix and think that that's going to come out as a cake. I think that 35 years in Silicon Valley have provided me with a thick skin. The thick skin is made out of scar tissue. That's what it takes. Now, for your particular situation, I did in this meeting what I recommend all women do, which is to be clear with the other women that we have to support each other's voices. So you can't speak for yourself. You can't say, you got to listen to me. You got to look at me. It should be Wendy or Amy or Audrey saying, I think Zoe said something that was really important. Let's talk more about that. We can support each other as women. And we need to raise each other's voices. And women don't like to speak up for themselves, but we should speak up for each other. This is what our daughters need us to do. It's not about being introspective or shy. It's about what is the world that your daughter should not have to face what you face, Zoe.
Mm.
But we're turning into an exclusive group here, excluding the men now.
No, I don't think we're excluding. We're asking for space. I think it's important for everybody to have space, particularly in an environment that we can actually control. So it's up to me to create space for anybody who wants to speak and to be sensitive about who might want to speak, who wants to speak in chat. But where we have this manufactured space, it's important to be authentic. And on a session we had, somebody was incredibly authentic and it created a bit of an uproar. But actually the lessons that were learned from that were extraordinary, and it helped people to experience something outside of, the everyday. Mm-hmm. So in a place where I organized with Jonathan a session on this, I should feel that I can bring something to that. And that would be to hear all voices, but to mediate and be sensitive to a conversation where perhaps, you know, 4 people from similar backgrounds or of the same sex have spoken, that it might be time for somebody else to join in. But I can't, as Maylin was saying, force anyone else to join in. But it doesn't mean that I'm going to stop asking for that. And I think that's where I have the best experiences, is when I ask for support, and I ask that you take a fresh look, and that you understand that it was me that asked you that question, and I would like a response. And I think trying to work out the space you inhabit is something that is incredibly important. And by default, men inhabit more space, and women tend to inhabit less, unless we go into specific areas where, yes, we have gender separation. But I think it's perfectly fine to ask for that in an environment like this. So I don't feel like I'm excluding anyone, Eleonora, but very happy to have that conversation.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, the men do take up more space, mainly because we eat more chips. But I think that the men in this group who are here, who want to talk about diversity and inclusion, want to talk about belonging, and men who go, you know, there are more women in this group than the men, so there should be more women voices in this group than male voices. So I think we're all happy to take a step back and listen to this conversation and learn.
And I think, you know what, that's for me what makes this a fascinating conversation, is that there is a challenge, and that we're all able to respond to that, because I want to be part of something that is different, that does bring that opportunity to everyone's voices. Simon, absolutely, yes.
Well, I'm like Linda. It's like there's so many things that I want to say, but because we were saying tags and profiling is not good, but you need to talk about women and men, so you can say that women are underrepresented, for example. But we should work towards no tagging, no labels. There is no women, no men, there are human beings. Because the moment we start putting tags, then I could say this, Maylin, I am a very sensitive man, and I'm always struggling with being a man. And if I say that, well, of course you can, I have a lot of times that I have been labeled homosexual or gay just because I am sensitive. I don't have to defend myself. I just give up about what the others think. But so that's the challenge. It's like a vicious circle. Okay, you need to talk about blacks, about how they are underrepresented. You talk about women, about that. The moment you start putting a tag, then you are making a mistake in the long run, because we need this just to hear each other, regardless of anything. But then I understand that LGBTQI community, there was a study that in Twitter are 72 genders. But then my daughter said, no, that's BS, because there's only 3. It's women, men, and well, masculine, feminine, and non-binary. But then I said, well, I want to be a quantic gender. That's how I feel. So that's the problem. I'm like Linda, like so many things. So we should start like knowing what are the causes of not including the other, and tagging, even though it helps, on the other side, it is creating something that we don't want in the future. So how we do it, it's difficult. And you mentioned parents and things. So the other problem is that, let's say you start changing kindergarten, and Linda, you said they're open to everything. Yes. And then they come the parents, don't do this, don't do this. And let's say you change also parents, and then you go to the workplace. And there again, they are having spaces like nurses and doctors. Like doctors are higher than nurses. So it's a difficult topic, but I'm really happy.
But then again, you can see, like, most people assume that nurses are female when that's not true either. I will say this, in terms of the tags thing, I believe, and I'll take it completely out of the core of the conversation, talking about a conversation I had with my business partner about Tesla. When Tesla first came out with cars, he was saying, this doesn't have a combustible engine. Why does it have to look like a regular car? And the reality is we as a society are scared shitless about change. And so when you start to try to change things and make it hard conceptually, immediately you start cutting people out. And I agree that we shouldn't tag people, but I do believe, and I had the same conversation with Dean, and we're futurists. We're constantly thinking about the future and where's society going and how do we accept change? And we advise people and businesses on how to look at change and embrace it as opposed to run away from it. But then we had a conversation about BLM, where, BLM has been around since 13 or 14. But really came to prominence last year with everything going on around the Black Lives Matter movement. And Dean said, well, why is that necessary? And it was sort of like that all lives matter thing. And my argument is that by focusing, to Carlos, to your point and to Linda's point about this is daunting. There is so much to think about. Sometimes you do have to bring it down really small and really fine to dig deep into what's really going on. And, Dean tells me, oh, well, we don't have that issue in the UK. I was like, I don't believe that. That's bullshit. And sure enough, the day after we have this conversation, the editor of Vogue UK, or British Vogue, who is a Black gentleman, was stopped from going into his building because of his color. But by getting into these tags, by defining, I think, it goes both ways. By defining, it allows us to really stop and think and try to understand what is that element going through? What is that experience? So that we can then start extrapolating to others' experiences that we don't know, because there is so much we don't know. One last thing, with the humbleness, I have met so many powerful people that are extremely intelligent, that are extremely productive in terms of creating change, that are some of the most humble people I've ever met. So I don't subscribe to the fact that you can't be humble and have amazing insight or create amazing change.
I wish I could find some way to have Wendy and Amy and Audrey and Jessica speak. That's one wish. Anyway, I wanted to say we have to have tagging. I apologize to Carlos. The reason is that the machines are using our current biases. So AIs are saying that doctors are male and nurses are female. AIs are just assuming it. This is, if you go into everything that's been written, whatever you train AIs on, they think that prime ministers are men and housekeepers are women. This is just how our societies have evolved. The language issue is actually so deep that the machines are learning it from us. And the more we rely on machine learning and AI, the more into concrete we put these biases. And so one of the reasons I joined this meeting is to really raise the awareness of the Royal Society of the Arts that, okay, societies like RSA brought forth the Enlightenment. Right now, we are looking at going into dark ages where our current human biases, unacknowledged by ourselves because we don't like to talk about things we're not good at, are now being put into stone in algorithms. And a reference is in the chat. So I'm just saying, it would be very, very nice to not have to deal with this. But if we don't deal with this, we really are going to have big, big problems in the future.
I completely agree. And underlying a lot of this is an information architecture system that was defined by a group of men back in the 1970s. And that's what, in terms of taxonomies and ontologies, is being embedded back into systems that we consider to be new and exciting and change making. when, as Maylin says, what we're actually doing is leaving our difficulties to machines based on reenacting the past with all its worst forms of bias, where human decision is being removed. And I am reminded of some of the things like the Amazon Digital Turk, and the way in which some humans are actually being used to reinforce some of this thinking as well. And it's absolutely fascinating, but we are absolutely doomed if we leave it to the systems that are being built in now. We have to find a way out of this.
Hi, everybody. Yes, so I'm easing myself in gently because this is my first RSA event. I've missed tons that I've been booking because my work has just been off the scale. I'm just finding the conversation very interesting. My role, I work for Natural England, one of the arm's length bodies that works for DEFRA in England. So we're a sort of government body, but focused on nature and the natural environment, which is particularly important. And about a third of my job is as our ethnicity and race champion. So I'm an advocate and an ally and an ambassador within the organisation, hence my interest in this. I'm finding the conversation quite interesting because it's going off on a lot of tangents, but I'm conscious that at the moment with things like the taking the knee debacle, shall we call it that, and the politicisation of that, the bit that concerns me most is when having the conversations, regardless of talking about language, whichever country you're in, there is a very strong politicisation around it. And by that I mean politicians are using it to bend it to their will to suit what their agenda is, as opposed to just focusing on the real issues. And it's interesting to use that footballing example for many of you that are in touch with what's been happening around that actually we seem to be in a really weird environment where it's the done thing for a politician to tweet their opinion about something that's actually a social and cultural issue that has nothing to do with them, because they're not legislating against it. They're just tweeting to make themselves look good, or to try and show a connection with the common people, as it were. And I kind of wish they'd just stay out of it because it doesn't really help.
I'm sorry, Audrey. It's interesting. It's a great point, but they're also arguing that what business do athletes have to talk about something that is considered political?
Yeah, I think that because you've actually nailed it, Jonathan, because the Black Lives Matter movement is not a political one. It is, for my concept, I'd say it's more of a social and a cultural one, and it is about addressing the inequalities historically that still appear in the present, and that goes to the heart of things like privilege. Sportsmen use their public platform to talk about an issue that is important. In other words, they're famous so they can command attention, and that's where they're doing it. They're not doing it for any one party, because I'm pretty sure if you canvass the England football team, there'd be a wide range of political affiliations. I'm sure there are some Conservatives in there and some Greens and some Lib Dems and some Labour. So for them, it's not a political issue. But my point is that politicians are making it into one. Now, you could argue, if you wanted to take the debate further, that it needs to become politicised because that's the only way anyone will do anything about it. That's for another event, I think.
Yeah, we are running out of time, sadly, just as we get into the heart of the conversation, but I do like to respect everybody's time. Thank you everyone for coming along. As always, we open some interesting conversation and topics. We never close them down, but I think that's our job to do that, to create that space. I think it's incredibly important. And to that end, our next event, which is on the 17th of September, we move into, and I think, Maylin, this will interest you, the title is The Human Worth of Creativity. And we are looking at what it means to be creative, the value structures that we place on creativity, and how that also intersects with artificial intelligence and the structures that we are imposing or lifting from areas within both the art and science worlds. So a bit of a pivot there, but there is a thread which underlines all of this. which is the need to create space for some fantastic conversations with the incredible people that come to the ASN every month. So with that in mind, I would like to thank everyone. Jonathan, did you want to close up with any final conversations before we finish?
Yes, that we all want Lisa's t-shirt.
Yes.
The future female.
Yes, that has to be
yes.
ASN t-shirt.
we're gonna be.
My daughter will love that t-shirt.
Look, the beauty of the ASN, and we are just so we're not confused, we're taking a summer break for August, so that's why we're not meeting back up until September. It's always about, we're all members of society. That's why we all have a rightful place as part of the ASN, and we welcome people new, returning. The conversation is always fantastic. So thanks to everybody that was able to participate today. And for those who are listening or not able to turn their switch on, that's all good. It's all beautiful, as long as we're all sharing in the space. And that's what Zoe and I are always looking to do, is create that space. If anybody has any ideas or thoughts of what they would like themes to be in coming months, again, we are third Thursday of every month, except for August and maybe December. We're still figuring that out. And so everybody that is here is a part of that. So please feel free to reach out. Previous podcasts and this one also will be posted at augmentedsociety.org. Thank you so much for being here. We hope that you have a great 2 months and that we look forward to seeing you again in the future.
Yeah, thank you everyone. Goodbye.
Cheers.